Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, depending on where you're joining us from today. My name is John Crossan with Health-ISAC. I want to thank you all for joining our virtual training session titled Securing Medical Device Infrastructure on a Shoestring Budget today. The trainers, again, are Matt McMahon and Helen Negre. This is part 2 of our 3-hour training session that was provided in 2 separate sessions. Many of you joined last week for part 1. That was last Wednesday, May 20th. Thank you for those joining back again today for part 2, and for any new people that are joining today for part 2. This training is TLP White. Just a reminder that all participants are muted. If you do have any questions as we go throughout the training, please type them into the question box in the control panel, and we'll address each question after each session if time permits us to do so. This training is being recorded and will be available to listen back to. At the end of today's training, we would appreciate you providing any feedback in a short survey that will pop up when you sign off of this GoToWebinar. The feedback will help us improve on our future events. I'll now turn it over to Helen to begin today's training. Helen?
Hi, everyone. I just wanted to add one more little maintenance or housekeeping detail. We will also try to pull the questions from the chat. So if we don't get to them all in the time between each session, we will go ahead and type up answers when we send you all the slides, and we'll also send you our contact information. So if you have any questions or you want to deep dive further into one topic, we can go ahead and just talk to you one-on-one. That said, we can't make specific recommendations. I can't say go buy this brand of firewall or this, this particular software, where I can say these are the criteria you should look for. But we're not here to endorse one thing or the other. Our recommendations are, we attempt to be as agnostic as possible in this. And let's get started. Today's topic is probably not the most exciting, but it is necessary, medical device patching, and it is not without its own controversies. So why have a patch management strategy? At the end of the day, it is to reduce risk. So your security updates still need to be managed under the FDA manufacturer's quality system. We, as the manufacturer, have to perform tests, especially on operating system updates, to make sure that it does not impact any clinical use. There's many reasons why patches are generated. It could be that an unacceptable or uncontrolled risk to clinical functionality was found, or that manufacturers are creating a patch as part of cyber hygiene and risk reduction. It could be that a third-party component needs a patch for a cybersecurity risk reason. It could be that we're introducing a functionality. There's a lot of reasons why patches are generated, and the reason that this patch is released is one of those things you should take into account. If it's a risk to clinical functionality, obviously that patch will have more of a priority than a cyber hygiene patch, though those are also important. What are some of the challenges? The challenges are separated into technical, organizational, operational, and who's impacted for those different risks. So there's a lot of diversity in the medical device landscape, and that is part of what makes it so difficult. There are many operating systems, different hardware, different third-party software components. You can't have a one-size-fits-all strategy for medical devices. Some are network enabled, some are not. Some have remote management capabilities, some do not. It's just an enormous amount of variety, and that makes it in and of itself a difficult project to tackle. Hospital networks are complex as well, and hospitals have to manage a number of vendors. Usually the vendors each have their own recommended patching strategy, and it's part of the diversity. It can become overwhelming. Not all devices have remote access available. Not all vendors will have third-party patches available. There's a number of dependencies that you have to take into account. It's a big project. Organizationally, there could be some issues with device ownership or the IT team's relationship with the clinical team, security risk concerns, functionality risk concerns, third-party maintenance. It's complicated inside an organization as well. Then you have compliance concerns. Everybody has a change management system. These devices are in use every day, year-round. The device may have system dependencies. A constant change in a hospital is not great, and hospitals cannot install, or clinicians cannot install operating system security patches directly. So whatever the operating system is, there's a chance that the vendor will regularly put out a patch. We think of Patch Tuesday, right? And you cannot then just take that patch and say, okay, I'm going to patch my device. Manufacturers don't allow it, and in some ways it can affect clinical functionality. So it's a risky decision to do so. So who's impacted by our decision to patch or not patch? Patients. It can affect care delivery, treatment decisions. Of course, there's compliance. If a patch or a cyber incident brings a machine down, then you have a revenue reduction as well. There's more complexities. There's a diversity in the medical device manufacturer service level agreements. Larger healthcare organizations may employ some sort of automated patch system to distribute and install operating system updates. So when you do have that kind of plan in place, there needs to be some sort of mechanism in place to protect the medical devices and ensure that those patches are not being pushed to your devices. Management or security agents are not generally approved for use by medical device manufacturers. So it's not like you can have an agent on your device, quote unquote, legally. Automated systems may accidentally patch a non-approved device. It's difficult to monitor and assess the impact of vulnerabilities on each of your device in your entire organization. And that makes it difficult to decide what level of compensating controls you need to put in place. Many devices can only be patched when not in use. And since these devices are often in use constantly, to remove it for patching is a inconvenience, and in some cases it's almost not possible. The nice part is if you have an existing preventative maintenance cycle in place, then you can leverage that maintenance cycle as a space window for implementing patches. So I think we've all heard of the shared responsibility for medical devices between the medical device manufacturer and the hospital. We design our products as securely as possible, and then we expect these devices to be deployed in secure environments with proper segmentation, and access management controls in place. So we, medical device manufacturers, we try to have device security by default. We take data privacy and data protection into account. We try to make as many security features available to the clinic as possible. We have contracts to go over maintenance. We have the requirement to disclose vulnerabilities, and we keep track of our third-party software disclosures as well, and then try to release or have an obligation to release patches in a timely manner. So patch management process requires asset management as its core. You need to collect the appropriate level of data on each device in order to know what you have, where you have it, and then make a determination on how to patch it. So one step, or beginning step, is create a device risk profile. You triage by exposure, likelihood, and impact. What is the network exposure of this device? What is the data? What type of data is on this device? And will this affect patient safety or clinical care at all? If the device is networked, as we had previously discussed, you can scan your network and collect some information, such as host name, MAC address, IP address, wireless interfaces. When you're creating your inventory information of medical devices, you may also want to note serial number, as in interactions with the MDM, that often is an important piece of information to have. I did not come up with this Venn diagram, but I have been very happy that it exists. This gives an idea of the complexities of the software bill of material and its uses. When you're creating your profile of your device, you're going to be using your software bill of material and security white paper to collect a lot of the, at least initial state data. You're going to want to note the operating system version, patch level, when the last update was, what installed patches are already there, any middleware or dependencies, as much information as possible to create this profile of your device. You're going to, this is more on the creating a security profile. You're going to want to note what controls, what security controls are already part of this device. So is there encryption? Can you log events and create alerts? What kind of remote access is in place? What kind of access management? Is there some sort of firewall, antivirus, etc.? And you want to note all of that when you're building your profile of each device. You also want to keep a copy of the MDS2 and security white paper for every version in use in your environment. So this information is updated with every version, and you can have a lot of diversity in your device, in your environment. So you're going to want to keep a copy for every version you have in use. So on the back to the triage by exposure, likelihood, and impact, the network exposure is what we mean by exposure. So is it internet accessible? Is it segmented? Does it have a VPN or remote access? Does it dial home? All of these will help you decide what is the risk for that device. Further into that risk, okay, if it's accessed, what kind of data is stored? How long does that data live on that device? How many records? What is the nature of those records? Where are they stored? Is the data encrypted? you're going to want to know exactly if something happens, what can be, what's at risk. And then make the decision, is the device critical to care? Is it life-sustaining? Does the device represent a single point of failure? And have you done this kind of security evaluation and risk evaluation on the device before? Then you're going to plan your patch management process, which would be validate the patch and then safely deploy. So if you're going to patch your own device, and especially if it's not outside of the recommended strategy from your manufacturer, you want to first obtain manufacturer approval. You'll want to test this patch on a machine and to ensure that there are no negative effects, and schedule patch during a normal maintenance cycle. Make sure you use device and use safeguards, deploy and apply patch, and validate that the device is ready to go back to service. Does the manufacturer, things to consider when you're planning. Does the manufacturer have an existing patch management approval service? What's in your service level agreement? You're going to want to see, well, what kind of maintenance and support you already have in place. You want to obtain a list of approved patches from your manufacturer and test those out. Document what happens so that you know what's the impact to your device. You also want to document once everything has been installed so that you can document the new patch level for your install base. You want to ensure that the patch management system can isolate only the patches that you're authorized to use. Ensure that only authorized and approved patches are deployed to the medical device. And just once again, just only deploy the approved patches for that device. So change management considerations, schedule the patch during the preventative maintenance cycle, perform a test on one device if possible. Make sure that everybody knows that this device is confirmed to be out of service, and before you actually patch, check every now and then. It's like, oh yeah, we all know that this CT is not going to be used, and then it's in use. Isolate your device into a VLAN that is segregated just for maintenance. Deploy your patch, and then just check to make sure that everything is up and running and ready to return to service. So it's ultimately a simple process that requires a lot of planning. And that's all I have for you today. We can go to some questions.
Hi, Helen. We do have a couple of questions that came in.
Okay.
There's one there. Are there any risks to medical devices with vulnerability network scans?
In many devices, yes. More and more often, medical device manufacturers are building devices that can withstand scans. In our documentation, there will be specific guidance. So sometimes it'll say, do not scan this device. It will knock down the device and affect clinical functionality. In some cases, especially in more recent devices, it'll say, you can scan it, but you need to restart it afterwards. And some devices can be scanned with no issue. It really depends on the device that you have, and you'd want to check your manual and your documentation. Yes, these slides, so the next question I see is, will these slides be made available for both sessions? They will. The slides, answers to these questions, anything that I can find that'll be helpful there, will be made available. Okay, the next one is there a difference between getting approval for a medical device updates and SAMD software updates? So if we are, go on.
I was just going to say, I'm wondering if that's like approval to run it, to install like at a regional approval board within to implement the software update, within the hospital. Having worked IT or at least EMR support at a hospital in the past, I know, you had to get approval for both. The process wasn't really different on the hospital side. I don't know if I'm interpreting the question right.
Well, I believe SAMD is the software as a medical device. So when it's a software only device, usually whatever you have it installed, as long as it meets the criteria, you can go ahead and update as normal. So if this has to be installed on a particular server, the clinical functionality is then decoupled from the actual machine. So in most cases, and you would have to read your documentation, but in most cases you can go ahead and update that Windows box and it have no deleterious effects. And if you're talking about actual updates to that medical device software that is separate from the server in this case, you would if the patch is coming from the manufacturer, in most cases you'll be fine. It is implied permission, and as long as you follow their instructions for updating, you should be fine. All right. Do MDM post their patch updates to a central repository to help HDOs have one place to monitor what needs patching? Not all. There's no standardized requirement for medical device manufacturers to follow. It is becoming more and more of a practice to do that. But not all patches in all manufacturers are listed in one central repository. As time goes on, I think that'll become more and more common.
So next question is, what is your opinion on security scanning when it requires reducing the security of the medical device to function? Example is enabling unnecessary services, opening ports on the firewall, disabling whitelisting, enabling file sharing, creating admin accounts, etc.
If you're scanning in your environment, I personally would then scan it as it would be used. That would mean, closing ports, leaving the whitelisting in place. However you are going to be using it in your environment, that way you get a kind of, I believe, more realistic profile of your risk. Ultimately, it's your decision.
Thanks, Helen. The next question is the FDA October 2018 cyber guidance. Do you know when FDA will release updates to this 2018 guidance?
I do not know. Matt?
I don't have a date. I know these, the things that they're working on, but yeah, I unfortunately do not have a date exactly of when that will be. And I'm sure that, recent current events probably drastically changed that timeline too.
Yeah, I would say most of what I've heard was it is coming, but not a date in which it'll be here.
I know at most of these the medical device or medical cybersecurity conferences that we speak at, Suzanne Schwartz from the FDA typically gives an update on documentation, what's changed, what's new, what's planned for coming out. I don't know when her next talk might be, but that would probably be where I'd look to see, for the update. It would have been this spring session for H-ISAC, but I know Archimedes is doing a conference too that's now all virtual, and I believe it's free, but I don't think I saw her on the list of speaking for that either. So hopefully we'll hear from her soon or from the FDA soon, and we'll know when that's coming out. But yeah, I have to assume that current events, that timeline's probably changed.
Thank you. The next question is it recommended practice to develop a configuration baseline for every medical device prior to service deployment?
Yes. I would figure out your baseline and your risk profile, as I kind of laid out here, before you service your medical device.
Thank you.
No problem.
Another question. Do most medical devices now allow installing certificates into them to allow for network access control and for authentication purposes?
Most is difficult to gauge. It is becoming more common in newer releases. One of the difficulties with this landscape and the variety is that a lot of devices are just old. We've seen it time and time again where somebody has a device that's 15 years old. It still serves its clinical purpose. That device is not going to have some of the functionality that security professionals or IT professionals are looking for. So the answer would be yes in some of the newer devices, but overall, if you're looking at the entire installed base of all the medical devices, most is not happening.
Okay, thank you. There's a few more questions. Still have time to take a few more questions?
Matt, I'm going to leave that to you. This is basically our allotted time limit for this section, but
Yeah, I think we can maybe do one or two more, and then we can defer.
Okay.
If I don't get all the questions today, then I will go ahead and pull these questions from the chat log and answer them when we email out your slides. And I mean, we can even answer these questions when we post the videos in the comments section.
All right, thank you. The next question is, what are the emerging practices to post updates on patching?
It depends on manufacturer. A lot of manufacturers are creating a portal where device owners or whoever on the on the HDO side is performing the updates, they can log in and then get an idea of what patches are available or when patches are coming up. There is a effort to push this data out instead of requiring people to log in and obtain that information for themselves. And I think this next question will be our last question.
Okay. So the next question is, on average, how many patches per year do most medical devices release?
It depends. Some will try to do it quarterly, just as a matter of habit, and many do only post patches once a year. It depends on the level of effort and the severity of the patch. Of course, if a critical patch comes, then that will be dealt with out of cycle.
All right. Thank you very much.
No, thank you.
And Helen, if you could make me the presenter, I can share my slides. Perfect.
Yep, I was on my way to do that.
No problem. All right, can folks see? Yeah, Helen, can you see the slides? Or John?
Yes,
Okay.
I see them. Yes.
Great. All right, so next we have 2 modules left. We're going to talk about physical security next in hospital systems. Physical security, this one was an interesting presentation to do. I initially created the slides a couple months ago, and obviously, very unforeseen situations in healthcare the last couple months. So I suspect there's some definite changes to physical security, but currently, certainly less people are, I at least hope, trying to maliciously get into hospitals at the moment. And hospitals certainly are doing have a much tighter restriction on physically entering hospitals. So hopefully we get to a stage in the post-COVID world where maybe this becomes applicable again, but obviously, to be aware of that. So why focus on physical security for hospitals? It is important. We focus on PHI data, securing that. It's important to note that physically accessing a hospital or accessing medical equipment that's within a hospital, often is the first step to be able to compromise that data. So something we want to focus on. So visitor management, this is just some stats to kind of give you a sense of where most hospitals are I should say where most hospitals were a couple months ago pre-COVID with physical security. So at that stage, back in 2018, 34% of hospitals reported having some incident of trespassing. Not really too difficult to understand why. Obviously hospitals, have medications, things like that, that someone would want to access. Also, patients that are in a hospital, maybe in a hospital because they're sick, or they may be in a hospital seeking care because of, perhaps a physical altercation, which there's another party to that may want to get access to, potentially finish the job. So certainly there's a number of reasons why someone would want to get physical access to a hospital that really shouldn't be there. That number was increasing, up from 2016. And then looking at the percentage of hospitals that actually physically lock down, their visitor management system. So 42% of hospitals require all 3 of these. So it requires the visitor to sign in, provide photo ID, and then wear a visible badge so everyone, knows as they're walking around that, that they are a visitor. And then 20% of hospitals utilize, some sort of physical man trap to actually, keep people while they're registering before they actually can go into the hospital. It's interesting to note, and we'll talk a little bit later about, some of the ways that you might gain access to a hospital with that maybe doesn't require all of these requirements. Many hospitals, as long as you know the name of a current patient that they can look up in the system, they will grant you access and kind of tell you where that patient is. And we'll talk a little bit later about how you could acquire a name of a patient that maybe you're not really close to. So what to restrict? We're going to restrict, physical access. That's not just for the safety of your patients and visitors, but also your staff. There could be things going on outside of work with your staff that you want to make sure that their workplace is safe and secure. Protecting PHI and safety of the patients and staff. So, again, protecting that PHI on a device by locking it down. And it's important to note that when we talk about physical security, we're often think about, and we talked about this in the first session, we're not just restricting or we're not just protecting this data from folks that, external attackers, but in healthcare, 58% of your data breaches involve insiders. So, maybe certain personnel within your hospital that should only be restricted to certain areas, or visitors, anyone, any new dads out there have probably experienced the, situation of, leaving the maternity ward to go down and, get a snack in the cafeteria, coming back and then finding themselves locked out of the ward and having to answer a number of questions. So there's certainly certain areas of the hospital, again, pre-COVID, that have consistently very much so been locked down, but a number of them do kind of remain open. So things you might want to kind of consider. The evolution of your physical security plan. So, in creating that physical security plan, we want to make sure it, updates with current events. Anyone working in an office environment, be it hospital, whatever it is. Certainly after, an event like 9/11, there was, a lot more locks on doors that we didn't see in the past. So, and it doesn't just have to be a big event like that, but, anytime a new technology comes about that creates a vulnerability, we want to, evolve that security plan to kind of keep up to date with that. This was a great quote. This was by Marley McKee, who is a self-professed America's Modern Manners and Etiquette expert, which, say what you will about her, but she had a couple million followers, so she was, it's kind of interesting. She said opening the door at work, so not just opening the door for anyone, but specifically at work, was listed as her number 2 of America's top manners. So while these are things that from a security perspective, people with security backgrounds are trying to minimize, we are fighting, very common behaviors, in a number of individuals. What's interesting, if you look at just door holding behavior, this was a study that came out of the University of Omaha. They studied over 1,500 students to kind of see, what percentage of them actually held doors open for individuals walking into a, quote unquote restricted area. Again, these are students, so you kind of have to generalize any academic research, but there was some really interesting gender differences with the studies that perhaps we could leverage in some of our awareness campaigns. So out of 1,509 students that participated, 925 that walked into an open door and had an individual right behind them, they would kind of, extend the door and open it for them. This was someone that was, again, during pre-COVID and COVID times, within that 6-foot range, they would actually let them in. So it was a pretty good percentage of individuals would exhibit that, handhold or arm extends to hold the door open for individuals in a, again, quote unquote, restricted area. 265 males versus 22 females actually, once they were going into that same open door and didn't have someone right behind them, turned around and glanced to actually see if anyone was coming, to check to see if they needed to continue to hold the door open. And then a subset of that, 112 men versus 13 females, held the door open for a significant amount of time. So that's, you're walking in the door, you see someone, in their car that's maybe 50 yards away. They actually stand there and hold the door open for them. So it's really interesting. If I was in charge of creating a physical security plan for a hospital, which I've never been, you might want to, and you're trying to increase that behavior of not holding the door open, might be wise to try to think culturally what's happening there. Why females tend to not hold the door open for longer for strangers that they don't know, and kind of maybe use that in an awareness campaign. Raising awareness, so just in IT, if you're not super familiar with physical security and the vulnerabilities that exist, not just with individuals like this gentleman here, Jason Street, who is a physical security penetration tester. This video I strongly recommend. I think it's 40 minutes. This was a DEF CON presentation, so a large cybersecurity conference. He showed that, by dressing up as if you were a janitor or someone that, works in the building, often you can kind of con individuals into just letting you into the building. And then if you don't have that access, if you don't have someone that you can get to let you in, there's a number of very easy physical tactics that you can use to open a door that is locked, and things like that. So if you're interested in physical security, it's a great talk. I strongly recommend it. And he's had a number of other talks too. So really anything by Jason Street is great for awareness. So why is this important? Especially nowadays with COVID, there certainly is a number of individuals that are probably trying to sneak into your hospital, but hopefully a day will come where maybe that goes back to normal. Manufacturers, so medical device manufacturers, make a number of assumptions in their threat and risk assessments when they're building products. They assume in many cases that the product is going to be installed into a quote unquote secure area. And this varies certainly. If we're talking a large CT device, yes, we're going to assume that's in a locked area. But if it is a small point of care device, often manufacturers will consider home use, or maybe it's a point of care device that they know can walk. Maybe not maliciously, maybe a doctor or a nurse puts it in their pocket and happens to walk it, go home with it or something like that. So certainly manufacturers, account for that if it's a point of care device, but you want to be aware that and read the documentation from the manufacturer that their threat rating is likely based on assumptions about physical security at your individual facilities. So testing those assumptions. I had the somewhat unfortunate experience when I was creating this in the fall, that a member of my family became ill, and I was regularly going to a hospital. First a local small local critical access hospital, then a large university teaching hospital, and then a number of rehab facilities after that. So these are some of the observations that I made from those facilities. Obviously, I'm not going to name any of the facilities. And also sprinkled into, I spent 3 years as an electronic medical records installer. So I would go to hospitals, train the staff on how to use the electronic medical record, install it on their system, help them configure it. So I spent a lot of time in hospitals, and there's a lot of information from that experience that I kind of put into this presentation. So initial access at both the facilities, the actual hospitals, not rehab centers, but hospitals, actually at the rehab centers too. When I went to visit this family member, I was required to check in, which is great. Unfortunately, I basically just walked up to the counter and said, "Hey, I'm here to see X person." I wasn't asked for an ID, so my ID wasn't checked. And what's interesting is, if I was a person that had some nefarious reason to want to get into that hospital, again, pre-COVID, interesting times nowadays, but if I go on Facebook, type in hospital, maybe do some Google dorking and type in hospital and the physical area that I'm in, or maybe a specific hospital, I'm likely going to find a name of someone in my network, especially if I'm maybe an older individual that higher percentage of friends that or loose acquaintances that might be actually in a hospital, to be able to provide me a name that I could actually get access to. And I suggest, if any of you are interested in that, try that and see how quickly it takes you to get a name. And if at your hospital or your facility all you're requiring is a name of a patient that's currently in the hospital, maybe you want to consider actually checking an ID or printing a badge for that individual. And the badge can just be a piece of paper, sticky paper. It doesn't necessarily have to be anything all that fancy. Once inside, so again, if I was a nefarious individual looking to do something, I generally got free access to the hospital. Typically when I've gone to hospitals, again, as the EMR installation staff, you only really get chaperones from what I saw at small Midwest critical access hospitals, where they tend to have a large gaggle of volunteers that can actually kind of walk you to where you need to go. Larger hospitals, people are busy. It's generally, okay, you're going to the east or to east wing. Here's the here's the patient room, and go there and go see your family member or whatever it is. And more often than not, I'm going to get lost going there anyway, just because it's difficult. But there are typically signs to help you along the way. And some of those signs, again, and this isn't from an actual hospital. This is our hospital that I visited. This is just something that I copied off the web. There's going to be signs along the way that says, "Hey, here's a server room. Here's some, areas that might be restricted." Certainly, it's good for IT or folks like that to know where those rooms are. But and I assume those rooms are locked typically. But interesting to note. At the bedside, so once you're at the bedside, at both hospitals that I travel to, and this is kind of rare. I don't really see this a lot, but the cows or computer on wheels that have the electronic medical record, in both cases they didn't require passwords. I was kind of watching the nurse as she came in and was doing her thing. She did X out of each individual record, so that was good. It wasn't, leaving PHI up on the screen, but that cow or computer on wheels was there and available if an attacker wanted to kind of walk over and pull up a record. Perhaps they could have. There are also a number of medical devices at the patient's bedside that didn't really require any authentication. It was just kind of there, and those are interesting in that if they have a patient database, it's possible that maybe if I had a rubber ducky device that I can plug in into a USB port on a machine and have it automatically execute a script, perhaps I could extract, a bunch of patient records. And if it's over 500 records, that's going to be a reportable, publicly reportable incident. So just kind of things to kind of consider. Also with USB ports, not really maliciously, but I've certainly seen a number of cases where if it has a USB port, someone's probably eventually going to try to charge their phone on it, whether it's a nurse or a patient. If all of the wall jacks are, have things plugged into it, medical devices, if I'm in a hospital for 3 days and my phone is dead and I need to charge it, where am I going to plug it in? Oh, there's a USB. Maybe I try to plug it in there and charge it. So just kind of consider that. If there is a USB port and you don't need it, it might be a good idea to just put a physical lock in there. Make sure you don't need it before you put like putty or glue or something in there, because I've definitely seen that, and then you find out after the fact, going back to Helen's patching module, that you actually needed that. So further access, again, I was just there to visit an actual patient and making observations, but I do have a colleague that actually does penetration testing specifically for hospitals. That's the industry that he works in. And he tells me regularly, with a mop and a bucket, there's really nowhere in the hospital that he can't go. And he's had some pretty interesting and scary stories of, he says he just pretends to be a janitor and can get just about everywhere. So, kind of consider that. Socially, we kind of look at people and, all right, if this individual looks like they should be a janitor, that, they're wearing the clothes, they got the mop, they got the bucket, they must be a janitor. So it's kind of interesting to consider. Printers, there was a great talk at Health-ISAC, one of the summits, maybe 3 years ago now, 2-3 years ago, that talked about printers as kind of the mother load of PHI, especially in like a discharge area where you get that, the patient leaves, they sit down, they get their full medical record printed out. It's important to consider, do your printers require authentication? Can someone just, walk up to it, say, print the last 10 or 20 reports, grab it and walk out, and then you have 10 or 20 full medical records? And again, as I'm kind of giving these examples, typically we're thinking of, oh yes, well that would be an external attacker that would still have to get in the building. But again, keep in mind that 58% of data breaches are due to insiders within your hospital that work for us, that have some level of access that we've granted that we, essentially trust. So, if we can really lock down some of this technology, it should really cut into that. I hope so anyway. Wi-Fi access. So Helen actually had a great story on this from a colleague that she had. I don't know if she's still available, but in kind of considering your Wi-Fi access, you might not actually need physical access to the hospital, but you might just be able to, pick up either Wi-Fi access or, actual network access, in some cases directly from the waiting room. Helen, were you around? No? Okay.
I am around. I didn't want to interrupt you in the middle of the sentence. But yes, I have a friend who's pen testing the hospital, and they were saying how excited they were because, you know, hospitals must be really locked down. And I laughed and said, no, I am pretty sure it's not going to be as challenging as you think it is. Um, and they got into the hospital. They sat down in the ER waiting room. This actually wasn't Wi-Fi. This was the regular.
The regular jack.
Yeah, they found just a jack in the waiting room while they were trying to plan their access. And they said, well, surely this can't be live, but I'll test it out. And it was. And lo and behold, they found a flat network with access from the waiting room in the emergency room. So
Yeah.
that was definitely a not very surprising story, but still somehow shocking. I don't know how things can be both of those simultaneously, but it definitely was.
Yeah, and I hope that trend's changing, but certainly, you know, with WannaCry a couple years back, you know, that was a big factor, is that, you know, a lot of hospital networks, you know, especially at NHS where it really impacted, were just flat non-segmented networks. And once WannaCry got in on one side of the network, it just kind of spread like wildfire across the network. So thanks. Thank you, Helen.
No problem.
You know, so what can we do? And again, I want to be kind of realistic with some of these. You know, we can require, it's good to actually require IDs, you know, for some of these visitors, and at least have their name. You know, if something happened, if there was a physical altercation, you know, with the patient that they were there to visit and they left, at least now we can go back and we can see, okay, well, we have, you know, an ID, hopefully it's a real ID, and at least have that individual's name to, you know, provide to the police. You know, another thing that we can do is a visible badge. So again, this can just be, you know, a sticky piece of paper that you put on. It's great too if it has the actual wing or area that they're supposed to be visiting. So that if we see that they're in a completely different area, you know, we can kind of say, oh, you know, I think you've gotten lost. You know, let's kind of bring you back to where you're supposed to be. Escorting them to the wing that they're supposed to be in, you know, that's great, but that's kind of pie in the sky. I don't think there's enough hospital staff or volunteers at most big hospitals to be able to do that. But, you know, if you're a small critical access hospital that has a ton of volunteers and you're looking for things for your volunteers to do, that's a great job for volunteers. You know, restricting physical access to only the areas that they're supposed to be in. Yeah, we kind of talked about that. You know, so looking at if there's certain areas in your hospital, and we kind of already do this, you know, as I said, you know, the areas where newborn babies are tend to be really locked down and restricted, hard to get into. You know, maybe your labs are like that. So, you know, important to kind of lock those down if they're not locked down. And that's not just with visitors, but that's with your staff as well. You know, if they have no need to be in the laboratory, they're not laboratory staff, you know, their badge probably shouldn't work to be able to get in there. So kind of segmenting that physical access with their badge if you're using the, you know, the tap and go system. And that's, you know, I foresee that's probably a question, you know, what do you do to kind of lock down the physical access? That's what we see a lot is, you know, hospitals going to that kind of, especially with physicians that, you know, tap and go, tap the badge, and then they're required maybe in the morning to type in their password. And then every time they access the system after that for X amount of time, and there's certainly been conversations, whether it's 4 hours, 6 hours, whatever it is, to actually need to re-enter their password to authenticate, they can keep going to device and use that the ID to be able to access systems. If you can kind of get all of that on one ID, that's great. You know, one way to really upset a doctor is to give them, you know, 25 different you know, keys or tags that they need to get into different systems and try to figure out which one's which. So, but that does seem to be a common practice that the hospitals are kind of going more towards that. You know, again, training staff on that tailgating behavior. You know, again, if you can leverage those gender differences and kind of understand why those are, that would certainly be, you know, one way to increase that. But again, you know, we're in COVID times, so hopefully these are, you know, hopefully this section is not needed as much now, but, you know, maybe consider it again, hopefully when we go back to whatever the new normal looks like. Lockdown devices when they're not in use, require authentication on printers. That's kind of big. Let's see. Oh, filtering traffic. So, that's something to look for. Are your manufacturers filtering traffic, or can I just go in and plug in a malicious USB and it will, automatically run whatever's on it? And then also consider, plugging in USBs with phone charging. Is it going to essentially fuzz the device and just brick it? Or what will happen if I plug in a phone to an infusion pump or something like that? Because it's it's not hypothetical. It's been done, and Helen and I have certainly seen cases where the device gets taken offline because of it. So again, locking down your access to your hospital physically is not only protecting PHI, but also protects your employees and patients. We have seen an increase in, unfortunately, violence against hospital staff from 2017 and 2018. There's a 57% increase in the ER. There's anyone that's, I was an EMT for a number of years. Those are certainly highly charged emotional situations that they're dealing with there. So, I can certainly see an increase there, but even outside of the emergency department, it's increased 52%. So it's kind of, focus on that and try to improve that physical security. So next up is vetting third parties, and that's our last module. I'll switch the slides, but let me know if anyone has any questions.
There is one question, Matt.
Sure.
How often do you recommend exercising and updating your physical security plan?
I think it's good for any type of plan to, have it scheduled so that you don't forget about it and you do it. I don't know if it's yearly. It kind of depends on how many people, if you're a very large hospital, maybe you actually have a full-time, physical security team. If you're smaller, again, that 25-bed critical access hospital, maybe you don't really have those many of those individuals around. So, maybe yearly, but as Helen said with patching, if something big comes up, you might have to patch out of cycle. Same as physical security. I think we probably had yearly physical security reviews, but I think after like a 9/11, everyone was revisiting that very soon after. So kind of depends on your facility, but I would try to do something that's not, you don't want to make it overly burdensome. You probably don't need to do it quarterly, but yeah, maybe once a year I would say would probably be good.
Thanks, Matt. That's all the questions currently in the box.
Great. And let me trying to switch over to the other slide. How'd you do that, Helen? Let me X that out.
Did you share your entire screen, or did you just share your slide deck initially?
I just shared the slide deck, yeah.
Okay, I shared my entire screen.
That's what I should have done.
You're probably going to have to unshare and then reshare.
Okay, stop sharing application. Okay. All right, let's do that. Perfect. Okay, can folks see that?
Yes.
Okay.
There was one more question that came in,
yeah.
Matt. Do you have time?
Yeah, definitely.
Is there any evidence of organized crime using mules to enter hospitals to enter listening devices?
I haven't seen it. I don't know if there's any evidence of it. And honestly, a big part of the issue with trying to study some of this is really underreporting, especially when we're talking cybersecurity within the healthcare space. Like even with COVID-19, the amount of cyber attacks that we've seen, certain hospitals have said, like I know there's been at least 5 hospitals in the U.S. or there was a security firm that said at least 5 hospitals in the U.S. were aware of, have been affected by it. But certainly there was a number of other hospitals that, probably have been affected by COVID-19 themed ransomware. but it wasn't reported. So I don't have any evidence of that, but certainly, I can see if it's something that they're interested in, hospitals have a lot of restricted medication that, those individuals might be interested in. Typically, those rooms are extremely locked down, or, the Pyxis unit is locked down and requires access. But yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if we saw it, but yeah, I think, organized crime, I'm certainly not an organized crime expert, but they tend to go for more soft targets, but I don't know, maybe healthcare is a soft enough target that, yeah, they would. I'm not aware of it, but it's something that I will certainly be Googling after this, because that is interesting.
Thank you, Matt. No other
Yeah.
questions.
Great. All right, so our last module, and this is perfect on time, we have a half hour left, is third-party communication and risk assessments. So Helen touched a little bit on this in her patching section, but how do you get, if you're a hospital, again, if you're a small 25-bed critical access hospital to a large multinational hospital, that how do you get the information you need from your manufacturers or device manufacturers or third parties to be able to do accurate risk assessments? Looking back to the HIM study, and again, HIM has kind of asked different questions each year, so I don't have an updated stat, but back in 2017, 88% of medical facilities did conduct cybersecurity risk assessments on third-party products, so medical devices. So it's a pretty good percentage. They didn't say, if they're what percentage of their fleet they're doing it on. Are they doing conducting cybersecurity assessments on every product, or just products that initially look kind of high risk? But a pretty high percentage are actually doing those assessments. So know that if you're doing them, you're certainly in good company. And a good percentage also of hospitals or medical facilities are actually pen testing devices on a regular basis. So if you're a medical device manufacturer and you have a device that you're not pen testing, you're not vulnerability scanning it, doing some sort of pen testing, fuzzing, whatever it is, know that the hospitals or the medical facilities you're selling this device to are, and you probably don't want them to find a vulnerability, or an issue with the device before you do. So definitely, it's a good practice to get into. So what is the scope, or what is the size of this assessments? HDOs on average are spending $3.8 million a year on third-party vendor risk assessments. And if you kind of put that in context of, all right, well, they're spending that much, what's the actual risk? The average cost of a data breach is $2.9 million. Let's see, so that was from Health IT Security, but I'm not positive if the 2.9 million was the average cost of a data breach in healthcare or just kind of across the board. I believe it's in healthcare because of the source, but I'm not 100% on that. And this is amazing to try to think about how you would actually conceptualize managing all of this. HDOs on average have over 1,300 vendors under contract. And just being able to dedicate staff and resources to vet all those is crazy. And most vendors, they tend to do a good job vetting them before they're in the door. Working for a medical device manufacturer that gets 1,300 pre-sale security questionnaires a year. Certainly we are, we're getting a number of those, but from this statistic and from what we're seeing, they're typically not reassessed. Once a device gets in the door, we're not looking at it, or the hospitals aren't looking at it every year to kind of see 2 years later if their security posture is any different. So when a HDO or a healthcare organization does an assessment, what actually happens? Okay, I've done the assessment, I found that there is gaps, there's some risk, maybe it's not unacceptable risk, but what do we do? 21% of the time, there's a gap that the manufacturer remediates, and they didn't really list exactly what that was. So maybe the manufacturer has an additional feature that's they charge an additional amount for, and that closes the gap, or maybe the manufacturer just fixes it. or has some other solution to remediate it. 33% of the time, the HDO mitigates the gap themselves. So they say, okay, that the risk is this level. It's kind of in the unacceptable risk category. But if we segment it off on its own, VLAN, put it on its own space in the network, add some other security features around it, we can get the threat level down to an acceptable risk. So that's happening about a third of the time. And 28% of the time, the HDO just says, I'm sorry, but you don't meet our basic security requirements, and we're terminating the agreement. So if you're an HDO and you're in that boat and you're kind of considering that and you haven't done that before, there's certainly a number of other ones that are doing that. And I guess the one thing, if you kind of add all those numbers up and minus 100, what is that? 18%. I assume just accept the risk. I don't know if there's another percentage in there that we're not categorizing, but certainly, I'm assuming there's a decent percentage of the time where you just say, okay, the risk is acceptable, we're accepting it, we need the device. Maybe we've looked and this device doesn't meet all of our requirements, but we've looked at 3 other manufacturers and theirs don't either. So, that's an issue, and have kind of accepted the risk and not remediated it. So what is the risk? Again, the Poneman study, or Poneman Institute, which does a study each year. 20% of healthcare breaches are due to third-party vendors, so that's not overly high, but it's certainly a concern and something that you want to vet. Again, 58% of those data breaches in healthcare are due to some sort of internal, insider component. So, but certainly, vendors you want to thoroughly vet as well, obviously. So what is the actual cost and labor that a hospital has to, dedicate to actually doing this third-party vendor risk assessment? On average, about 530, they spend about 513 man or woman hours a year dedicated, or not a year, a month, dedicating to assessing that third-party risk. And if you do the math, that equates to 3.21 people working 40 hours a week each month. So that's not to say that each hospital has 3 or 4 people full-time dedicated to this. They may have a team of 20 that maybe spends a couple hours a week dedicated to this. So, however it's kind of spread out, I know on the manufacturer side, it's more like we have a number of people that are all working part-time on it because, there's multiple different organizations that need to kind of weigh in on this risk. There might be technical folks, there might be sales folks. So, yeah, it's kind of spread out. So don't see this stat and think, oh, well, there's 3 or 4 people at a hospital that's all they do, that's their job. It might not actually look like that. What tools are they using? So about a third of the hospitals or HDOs actually automate that process, and there's a number of tools on the right. Trying to keep it vendor agnostic and not not recommend any tools. Certainly, if you go to any of the summits coming up, there'll be a number of the vendors there trying to explain to you why their tool is the best and you should use it. But just know that a third of the time, they are automating it in some way. So if you have other hospital contacts that, that maybe your system is similar to in size or scope, maybe you could ask them, what tools they're using, why they like it, why they don't, how it might be good for your system. And then, you can do that risk assessment, but is there a spot where you say, no, here's the basic requirements, and if you don't meet those requirements, we're just not going to purchase your product. The Mayo Clinic has done a lot of work for this. Call it essentially the gold standard, or they call it the gold standard. If you Google Mayo Clinic and basic security requirements or cybersecurity, something like that, you'll probably see a bunch of videos for different conferences that they presented this on. I got this from the CyberMed Summit that happened last year. And they present this at just about every healthcare and cybersecurity summit that's happened recently. So they basically say that there's 77 requirements, basic requirements that the device must have. And Mayo was integral in getting the MDS2, which we'll talk about in a little bit, updated from the 2017 to the 2019 version, which requires, or which included double or triple the questions that it had in 2017. And a lot of those questions came right from, different HDOs like Mayo's requirements. So, we are constantly trying to partner both medical device manufacturers and HDOs to make this process more smooth and more efficient and, more secure. So in addition to those 77 requirements, every device has to be easily patchable. The device receives timely updates, and there's a number of other ones. Obviously, we're not going to go through all 77. But having that system in place, it allows them to focus on high priority devices. And they also want to assess the whole family of devices. You may purchase a small point of care, say blood gas analyzer, and you might assess the risk based on that analyzer kind of as a standalone system. But you also want to look, okay, that analyzer that I bought from X manufacturer is connected to a middleware application that's also sold by that manufacturer, and a number of our other devices also send results to that same middleware application. But we have devices from other manufacturers that also send results to that middleware application, and only the devices that are sold by the same medical device manufacturer that makes the middleware have encrypted communication, but the communication from the other devices, because they're speaking different languages, don't have encrypted communication. And then we send the results from there off to an EMR. So it's important to kind of look at how it's going to be used. And medical device manufacturers do this as well. When we do threat and risk assessments on our products, we kind of consider, how is the product going to be used? We might do a threat and risk assessment on the same product multiple times based on the clinical use. This is the risk, and this is a categorization that we've assigned to it. But on a home use, that risk categorization might be completely different, and it might in some cases actually determine that, we really don't want to sell into that market because that risk is too high. That certainly happened. So communication, how do we actually communicate? If you're a health delivery organization, how do you get the information you need from a vendor, whether it's a medical device manufacturer or HVAC vendor, any of those, and certainly looking at the Target example, don't underestimate your HVAC vendors, and hopefully it's a better process than, as we see here, 2 cans and a string. So this is a medical device or MDS2 document that I talked a little bit about before, or the medical disclosure statement for medical device security. This is a 2017 version. It was updated in December of 2019, has significantly more questions. And again, this was brought by a consensus from, regulatory bodies, health delivery organizations, and medical device manufacturers. So this is really your starting point. This will give you a lot of information. If you kind of see some of the questions there, does the device store protected health information? Does it display it? Does it transmit it? Exactly what demographics and PHI things does it store? And then you see on the right-hand side, it's good to answer yes or no, then actually put in a note if you're a device manufacturer, because if you're saying no, maybe you're saying no because this device isn't intended to be, it's intended to be standalone, but if it isn't a standalone, then it's yes. So you may actually even see different versions of the MDS2 depending on how the device is deployed. And certainly we've seen that, MDS2 for, this device as standalone versus MDS2 for this device connected to a middleware application. And, you might see yes and no change on some of those questions based on how it's actually configured. Security white papers. So kind of before that, or in between of 2017 to when the new version of the MDS2 came out in 2019, there was a number of questions there that we realized that we really needed to get, that customers were asking, that we weren't really effectively answering, manufacturers weren't answering, and they weren't in the MDS2. So it was kind of dicey or not clear as to where to put that information. What a lot of manufacturers did was, before that 2019 MDS2 came out, that had 2 or 3 times the amount of questions in it, they put that information into what would be called like a security white paper. So in addition to an MDS2, if you're looking to purchase a medical device, you might want to ask the manufacturer too, hey, do you have a security white paper? Do you have any additional information? Now, this may be its own separate document, or it may be embedded within a manual. The manufacturer can kind of tell you where that information lives. And what does that information include? It includes the operating system, but also not just the operating system, but information about it. Is it a hardened, stripped down operating system, or is it wide open? It might have a software bill of materials to give you the list of all the third-party software that you need to be concerned with. What ports should be open for communication if it's communicating and sending results out, or maybe getting patient demographic information in. What services are running on the device, so you know exactly what should and shouldn't be on or open. Exactly what data points, so what sensitive data is transmitted and stored. You should see a network diagram, so it'll show you how your device relates to your own hospital network, or should relate. How do individuals authenticate on the device? Is there any malware protection on it, or can you add your own malware protection? Can I add my own agent? How does that flush out? And what security testing was completed? Talk about the intended operating environment. So this is what the manufacturer, how they expect the device to be run. What the expected network controls, physical protections, logging, all that other information. Does the device have any certifications? Is it ISO 27001 certified? And certifications are tough. We see manufacturers see a number of customers asking us, or I said the majority of them, is this device certified? We're starting to align, I think, on certain certifications, but right now it's a little bit tough with, in the US we have High Trust, in the UK we have Cyber Essentials. In Germany, their version of the NSA has their own certification. So we're kind of chasing all these different certifications for different areas that we're selling into. Hopefully we can kind of harmonize on an ISO or one specific standard. But if you have questions on certifications, that's kind of the current state of that. So how do hospitals acquire that information? Again, you can get the documentation, so the security white paper, the MDS2. But if you have specific questions that you need answered that aren't in those documents, how do you get those? Typically, what we see is a security questionnaire. So HDOs will send us a security questionnaire, or send a medical device manufacturer the security questionnaire. And we would then, or a team from the medical device side, would then have to complete that security questionnaire and send it back to the customer, which a lot of times it's just transcribing that information over. And if you are a medical device manufacturer, having that detailed security white paper actually is going to help you a lot, because you're going to be able to allow your staff to be able to just swiftly transpose that information over and not have to go to 10 different places to get it. Just some sample questions that you might see on there. How are the proposed system device, how does it ensure confidentiality, availability? How does the device or system protect data in transit, data at rest, things like that. If you are creating your own form, one thing to kind of note, this obviously is going to be for all of your devices, but you want to kind of make it useful. Only a subsection of your devices that you're going to acquire are going to be cloud products. If you have 200 questions on cloud products that you're requiring the manufacturer to put NA if it's not a cloud product, and then a comment for every single one, it's kind of a lot of a waste of time, both for the manufacturer to complete it and the HDO to review it. If you can do it in like a Excel spreadsheet version with different tabs. So you say, is it a cloud product? No. All right, well, the next 200 questions just get grayed out. Make it useful for yourself. That would be great. Security information portals. Helen touched upon this, and I think there was a question on it as well. Is there one central place where I can go and get? I think the question was, look at all the vulnerabilities on the product, but also just look at, if the manufacturer sells 600 different products, where do I go to get the MDS2s and the security white papers? And most manufacturers are trying to, get to a place where they have kind of one central location where you can go and get that information. Some are there, some are not, but that's where they're at least trying to go to. Business associate agreement, talking to a lot of hospitals, so you guys are probably well aware of this, and you probably utilize them, I'm sure. But if you're not, came from the HIPAA omnibus rule, required any individual or entity that performs functions or activities on behalf of a covered entity, so maybe the covered entity, that in essentially extending that liability to the business associate. So if you have to create a business BAA, you can certainly Google, and there's a template here at the bottom you can see. You can Google BAA and get like a very basic, draft of it, of a, proposed BAA. Obviously, your lawyers are going to have a field day with it and kind of rip it apart and reinvent it, but that's one place to start if you maybe have nothing at the moment. Information sharing agreements, they're kind of similar to a BAA, but it covers the minimum expectations for securing shared data. This is more if you're actually hosting data for that company. You're not just selling them a device, but maybe you have a cloud service and you're storing that device. That's something that you might have to deal with as well. And I know we're running out of time, so I'm trying to speed up. Security testing considerations, Helen touched on this, but obviously test in your test environment. You don't want to be pen testing a device in a live environment, and it's a good practice to reach out to the manufacturer ahead of time. Just ask them if there's any considerations. You might get mixed feedback back, but they might be able to tell you that one thing that keeps you from breaking the device, so that might be useful. And if you find anything, certainly let the manufacturer know, because it helps increase the product. So that's the end of the presentation, but I did have, again, we designed this to be a quick and dirty training for small critical access hospitals that don't really have a lot of IT resources or staff. So if you are one of those individuals, here's kind of some ways that you can continue to keep learning about these topics. So the traditional brick and mortar colleges, certainly all of them are online at the moment, but this is a school where I teach at, Salve Regina University. I'm not trying to plug them, but this is one of the few ones that I know about that actually have courses specific to cybersecurity and healthcare. But certainly any college that has cybersecurity courses, that's one option, obviously an expensive option. Certification, the HCISPP, this used to be a separate healthcare track or subtrack of the CISSP. That's kind of the preeminent expert level certification for security practitioners. And then at the other end, the kind of beginner end, you can do the CompTIA Security Plus certification. And I'm not endorsing either of these, just kind of showing you what's out there. Free courses online, again, not endorsing either of these courses, just kind of, these were the two that were listed at the top by TechRadar. One thing to say, a lot of these have great free resources, although in utilizing some of this material in some of the courses that I teach, I noticed that there was a big change in the fall of last year, so 2019, where a lot of these organizations started really restricting some of their free classes. So maybe I get 1 or 2 free classes, but that's it. So they've really kind of locked down a lot of their HIPAA and healthcare specific courses. So just kind of be aware of that. If you find a good free course and assign it to all of your employees, it might require a paywall the next time you go to use it. Certainly get involved with industry groups. We're doing this on behalf of Health-ISAC. They're a great group. I think with COVID-19 and everything going on right now, they're offering a 60-day free membership, trial membership. So there's a number of working groups through Health-ISAC that you can get involved in. I was involved in the Global Data Privacy Working Group, but they do threat intelligence, things like that. But there's no shortage of other groups, AAMI, the Healthcare Sector Coordinating Council. They have a number of subgroups there. Google it, kind of see what's out there, but Health-ISAC is great. Definitely recommend getting involved in them if you can. On the free side, local hacker collectives, so OWASP on the left, or DEF CON, which is the largest hacker convention or collection convention in the world. They have a number of local chapters. So this one, DEFCON 617, you can tell by the area code, is Boston. It's one that I'm a member of. Also DEFCON 401 in Providence, Rhode Island, I belong to. And these really offer, maybe not if you're in a rural setting, but if you're in close to a city, these offer great trainings. DEFCON 401, because of, recent events, their last 2 months meetups and the next 3 are actually all online. So if you're, check out Google DC 401 or DEFCON 401. And each month they have free security tools that they give trainings on, and then you can immediately implement it in your organization. So definitely check them out. See what's in your area for a DEFCON or a OWASP or another group security meetup. Maybe you can look at meetups. But obviously everything's kind of online now, so you can take advantage of the fact that if you live nowhere near Providence, Rhode Island, you can still see the DEFCON 401 meetings for, well, probably at least another couple months anyway. This is a great book. It's completely free on if you're kind of the one guy at your hospital that's in information security, how do you kind of grow that career and get more information, free conferences, things like that you can go to kind of bring that skill set back to your hospital and help the organization. Definitely recommend that. Some great talks, Micah Hoffman on how to join the InfoSec community. Again, how to develop your skill set and bring it back to the hospital to, again, if you're that 1 or 2 guys or girls at the hospital securing your network, here's some great resources. For certifications, just Google best security information security certifications of and input the year, you'll get that, or same with starter cybersecurity certifications. And here's how to find us. So, as Helen said, if we have any questions that we don't get to in the next 3 minutes, you can email us, find us on social media or whatnot. So any questions? I know we covered a lot in today in the 3 hours overall.
Thank you, Matt. There are a couple of questions. The first question is there a recommended questionnaire for third-party cloud vendors that may collect PHI or PII?
So there's been some working groups that have tried to create a standard questionnaire, and through the Healthcare Sector Coordinating Council, there's a subgroup on what is it called? Well, there's numerous of them that we're involved in. But there's several working groups that are looking on, getting that the standard questionnaire, but also the standard contract language that manufacturers and hospitals both preemptively agree upon. So, we could put that out in a free report where any hospital that's looking to negotiate a contract, they can kind of take that out and just plug it right in. And then hopefully if a manufacturer was a part of that working group, they can say, oh yeah, we know that verbiage. We don't have to send it through our lawyers again and have kind of our 2 legal teams fight it out. We already have that standard verbiage. So we're not quite there yet, but that is something that working groups are diligently working on right now. Several different working groups, both Health-ISAC, the Healthcare Sector Coordinating Council. I think Amy was involved in that. It's a very big topic. If you go to any of the conferences, Health-ISAC summits or whatnot, you'll probably see a talk on that. I think I was on a panel for it last summit, and I think there was another talk on it too. So it's very popular right now.
Thanks, Matt. Probably only have time for this one more question. So when scanning, do you recommend scanning one device of a certain type? For example, if there are many EKG devices, do you pull one from production and scan only that one, or rather than scanning all devices?
I would say probably pull it and scan the one. Helen, have you had different experience with that, or? I mean, you definitely want to be cautious of doing anything in your live environment.
Yeah, when scanning a device itself, I would scan that one device on its own, on your own like segmented testing network.
Exactly.
That way you can ensure that that device is not in use and that you won't affect anything clinically speaking.
And I mean, scanning one device as opposed to your whole fleet too. If you get to brick the one device as opposed to every EKG you have.
Thank you, Matt. Helen, any final comments? We're out of time.
Did we have many more questions? I don't know if we can. If there's one or two more, maybe we could crank them out.
There's yes. Are you seeing acceptance of the UL 2900 certification?
Yeah, that seems to be that's one that's becoming more common. Again, there's really not. We're still kind of waiting for that. This is the one certification to kind of rule them all that everyone is really going towards. So it's tough with certifications because getting certified is extremely costly, both in time and resources and dollars. So no one really kind of wants to jump and put all of that time and resource into getting certified and then finding out that maybe the industry went in a different direction. So I think we're very close. We'll definitely see it probably in the next couple of years, but I don't, I have a few that seem to be the ones that are maybe going in that direction, but I don't really have a bet yet on the one that's gonna be the main one, or if that even really will be the case, if we will have that alignment.
Thanks, Matt. The final one is someone asking, can you please show or send the free InfoSec book displayed near the end, the title and author, please?
Yep. It's InfoSec Rockstar. Ted Demopoulos, he does a lot of talks. If you Google him, I mean, you'll probably see 30 different talks that he's given. Basically, he's done this book as a topic at B-Sides and other security, security conferences. But yeah, the book, I believe the last I saw, the book was free if you do maybe the Kindle version. If you buy the hardcover, you probably have to pay maybe a couple bucks for it, but he's big with trying to put out free information. So if you don't want to buy the book, if you can go to like one of his hour-long talks, you can find it online. It covers pretty much all the information that's in the book. But yeah, just Google Ted Demopoulos with the spelling there, and you should be able to find it.
I also wanted to take a minute to say I didn't see the Biohacking Village on the slides. I wanted to give them a shout out.
Yeah.
They are a great resource to discuss, well, anything medical device related. They every year at DEF CON and at other conferences have space where you can actually put your hands on devices, test them. You can talk to MDMs face to face. They're a great resource. You can go ahead and pull up information from their website and see what's gone on in the past. I highly encourage participation from both the HDO and the MDM side. It's a fantastic experience.
Yeah, if you can get there, if you're a larger healthcare organization and can fund that, or if you're even just a small organization and a lot of individuals self-fund, it's DEF CON's, it's like, was it $200 to get to go to, and then obviously it's in Las Vegas every year, so if you don't live in Las Vegas, you have to get there and stay there. But yeah, the Biohacking Village is probably one of the most condensed places for healthcare, cybersecurity information you're going to find. So if you can get there, I mean, we volunteered last year and we had like 7,000 people come through the first day. It's crazy. And medical device manufacturers, as Helen said, donate devices. People are doing those vulnerability scans and trying to find compromising things on the device. And yeah, if you can get there, it's great. And there's probably I mean, we haven't heard yet. Is this year going to be virtual?
So the cool thing about the situation this year is that the Biohacking Village will be virtual and free for anyone who wants to participate. So right. Citizen scientists, security researchers, and regulatory members, HDOs, MDMs, if you want to participate, sign up and participate. If travel has been, I know this is specifically designed for people who may not have the biggest of budgets. If travel has been a prohibitive factor right now, this year is your ideal year to participate.
Yeah, and DEF CON, the whole conference is free this year, so there might be some other talks that you might want to go to, but yeah, that's a great point, Helen. I was kind of thinking about travel and everything, but yeah, this year is definitely a different situation.
Well, great training, Matt and Helen. Thank you to everyone that participated in today's training. Big thank you especially to Matt and Helen for providing the training last Wednesday and also today. Greatly appreciate that. Just a reminder for everyone, as you leave today's webinar, there's a short survey that will pop up. We'd appreciate any feedback you can provide to help us improve these future trainings. Have a great week, everyone, and goodbye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye. Thank you for having us.